In this episode of Investors and Operators, I am chatting with Robin Graham, who is a managing director and head of technology, media, and communications at Oppenheimer. We've known each other for over a year. They're one of 51 Labs clients. And I thought it'd be interesting to cover a variety of topics, not just the state of the market, lessons from his 30 plus years in investment banking, but also just kind of turning more to the personal story and understanding everything from favorite book, podcast, how he defines success. So we're going to jump straight into it. And Robin, I'm going to start actually with that violin over your shoulder. How long have
That
you been
one,
playing violin?
4 years.
And on a scale of 1 to awesome, what would that be?
A two.
So we're not going to be starting off this episode with anything. Okay.
The thing you have to know about the violin is that it's a labor of love. It's a personal journey. I do it for my own satisfaction. Definitely not for anyone else to hear. It takes a long time to get to the point where it actually sounds good to someone else. So stay in a little room here and practice violin on my own with my violin instructor.
So I see a guitar there also. Have you been playing that for a while?
That has sadly retired. I played that as a kid, acoustic guitar, classical guitar, and then I morphed into violin when I came back to music during COVID.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So warm up is done. Let's get into the kind of the state of the market. You cover and work with high growth technology companies. Like, what do founders, executive teams, investors need to know about just the state of the market in terms of public markets, private markets, whether it's capital raising, selling, particularly for these high growth tech companies that you guys work with? And maybe if you
Sure.
could provide a little context on your team and just kind of the background.
Yeah, so sure. Maybe I'll just go into a little bit of what we do and what I do. So I run a team of roughly 40 bankers. Um, we're located in sectors of finance and technology. So Silicon Valley is a big hub for us. That's where I'm based. New York, London, and Tel Aviv. At Oppenheimer, in particular, we have a strong Israeli practice, and I've been in that market for 40 years. So it makes sense as a technology group would be overexposed to the startup nation that is Israel, headquartered out of New York, where we have the bulk of our Oppenheimer and Company employees, most of our product teams in and around my tech group that helps support us from a transaction and execution standpoint. And then, the tip of the spear is really my bankers in tech, and they're based in Boston, New York, Silicon Valley.
Got it.
Um,
So yeah, and
I
actually,
don't.
let's put a pin on
Yeah,
Israel. I want we can go on for another hour about that, but let's put a pin on that. I definitely want to come back to it maybe later on in
sure.
the conversation.
So that team basically works across 11 different subsectors of technology. And historically, technologies. When I started as a banker 30 years ago, working in the tech industry, I figured out pretty quickly that you were sort of hamstrung being a tech banker out of New York. So I was there for a few years, learned what I needed to learn on Wall Street, and then quickly transferred out to Sand Hill Road, where I worked at 3000 Sand Hill Road for 11 years, right in the heart of the venture capital ecosystem. As a banker, we're taking companies in tech industry that grow out of venture portfolios and go into the public markets or go to strategic buyers that tend to be Silicon Valley centric larger public companies. So being here where there's sort of 60% of the world's venture capital housed, funding those businesses, funding those entrepreneurs and founders, and helping them scale businesses is really ideally located. We take those companies that get sort of escape velocity from venture portfolios, and we fund them in the private markets with growth equity capital. We bring them into the public markets through IPOs. We finance their high growth phase as public companies. And then once they get to 10, 20, $30 billion, and it's been so gratifying to see so many of my clients grow into that over the last 30 years, we tend to step back and go find the next cohort of growth companies in a new sector that is, attracting a lot of capital in the venture community and um, and growing into the market leaders of the future. So we work across 11 different sectors, everything from semiconductors, industrial and emerging technology, hardware businesses, infrastructure and security software, all the different parts of the application, enterprise software, front office, back office, etc., into internet and digital media, which was a sector that grew up during my career. The advent of the internet was sort of the late '90s, and it wasn't until mid 2000s that we really had meaningfully sized, impactful companies in the internet space. So I spent a lot of time as an internet banker, and we have an internet team that spends a lot of time in internet and digital media. And then, more recently, we're starting to think about new sectors of capital formation like space tech, and and gaming and other areas that are very promising, where there's a lot of potential for wealth creation.
So I know across those, the wide array of sectors, it kind of depends on the type of company, its profile, et cetera. But what are some insights around just the state of the capital markets, and what are some of in all these conversations you're having with your clients, whether, mature clients or ones that are just kicking off new relationships, like how are you kind of giving a set of kind of like the state of the market and what it means to them on raising money or selling?
Well, I think I'll try to give a 5 year context on that, because that's
Okay.
probably going to be most interesting to your audience. So, 2019 was a fairly normal, relatively slow market. Um, and we went into 2020. We had COVID impact us in February, March. The markets shut down for a few months, like the rest of the economy. And then we had Fed policy, which basically drove the borrowing cost to zero, the cost of capital to practically zero. And what that did was introduce a lot of opportunity for speculation. So investors suddenly flush with cash. You've got a high velocity of capital, and they're putting that to work. And they got increasingly bullish. They're funding more and more visionary businesses. And we had a lot of very young companies come into the market through IPOs and through the SPAC boom that happened, and raise money as public companies earlier than they otherwise would in 2021 and into 2022. Then, as the Fed reversed course and people were back to work, not necessarily back in the office, mind you, but back to work full time, we had the hangover effect of that capital boom. And so companies were flush with cash, they were spending money like crazy. The Fed reversed course, the cost of capital went up, and then suddenly you have limited access to capital. And so companies had to dial back their burn rates. And so the conversation across boardrooms in 2022 and 2023 were, how do we get to cash flow break even? And that started in the public market. So the public market investors were really only interested at that point, as they shifted gears to adopt a new Fed policy and interest rate environment, in companies that were either cash flow positive, EBITDA positive, or could get to that point very quickly. And everything else was not able to attract capital as stocks traded down and declined. So a lot of the more speculative companies that raised money in 2020 and 21, particularly through SPAC combinations, were left somewhat high and dry. And they had to adjust their playbook really dramatically to cut their burn rates. And so we're coming out of that now. We're starting to see some loosening in the capital markets. We've had a few tech IPOs. Reddit was one that was successful. We've got Rubrik on the road right now. There's a huge backlog right now of software businesses in particular that are, between 100 million in ARR and some cases 500 million in ARR, and profitable, and they've raised a lot of cash. And so they're, waiting for the right time in the market to go public. At this point, we've got some uncertainty around the Fed's change in policy through the course of 2024. We came into this year expecting 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 Fed rate cuts. That seems to have come back to consensus around 2. There's even some talk about whether the Feds will raise rates depending on what happens with CPI data here in the near term. So there's a lot of uncertainty around Fed action and interest rates and overall underlying inflation that's causing a lot of volatility. You see that in the VIX index. If you look at the VIX, it's spiked from 12, 13 to almost in 20. I think it's back down to around 16 right now. And so the companies that can go public are picking their window and waiting to see how other IPOs like Rubrik trade and are received. and waiting to see that those are positive signals before they come into the market. The companies that can't raise capital at this point and who haven't are still burning capital have limited access and are struggling, and we're trying to help some of them both survive and raise incremental capital to see their way through into healthier markets. And then the public stocks, it's sort of a have or has not have not environment. If you're a public company and you're growing reasonably well and you have EBITDA and you're cash flow positive, then you're probably in a stronger position from your stock point. Then we have the outperformers that were driving Nasdaq last year, which is anything that was exposed to AI. So you have the Magnificent Seven stocks, including now Nvidia, who traded extremely strongly just based on the hype cycle and the expectation that AI would deliver tremendous results, and you have seen that with a lot of these stocks, like Nvidia in particular. So a lot of the Nasdaq outperformance last year was driven by companies that are exposed to AI. The middle market has been slower and more difficult. New issues has been very, very limited, and even follow-on issuance from public companies that we work with that are in the small cap and micro cap market have been very challenged in this market. So I would say to executives and founders, they're two different constituencies, by the way, but they don't need to be. Some founders are still running their companies into the public markets. If you're a public company, investors have an appetite only for businesses that are proven that they can find the operating leverage to get to cash flow positive. And if you're not in that bucket, you need to figure out a plan and communicate clearly about that plan to investors to enjoy a healthy multiple in your stock.
How does your general client base break down in terms of like truly working with the founders or the founding team versus the investors? Like, how does it generally work? And maybe what are some of these kind of maybe most common misconceptions or misreads about the current market and these tough conversations? Like, listen, you're not going to go public this year, and we need to shift our strategy.
Yeah, it's an ever evolving conversation. I mean, I think the more experienced management teams did what they needed to do in 22 and 23 and have businesses that have strong balance sheets and healthy profiles. Um, I think founders who have never been in the public markets and who are trying to manage their companies towards the public markets and are still in executive roles in doing that, we're having a lot of conversations with them around how they think about the transition to the public markets and what the right timing might be.
Yeah.
Um, but we're talking to all constituents. We talk to executives, management teams, founders, investors, in those companies, the venture capitalists who sit on their board, and and then the public institutional investors that are the demand for those equities, if and when we bring them into the public markets, to kind of bring all those things together as
Yeah.
companies toe the line to go public.
You've had you probably have a fair amount of data points over 30 years of seeing high growth technology teams scale. And I'm curious to know the entrepreneurs who are successfully able to scale and grow into the next identity, um, where they're not, where they've shifted and they're not doing the execution, that they've truly shifted. Like, what are some of these most common traits that you've found of these entrepreneurs who are able to not just be the entrepreneur and the managers of where the business is, but where the business is going? What are those key traits?
I think you put your finger on something really interesting. And I know that a lot of my friends who are professional investors look for this as well. They're looking for founders who can not only conceive of a business and see a market opportunity and build a business that addresses that market opportunity, but that actually want to, want to build that business into its second act. So the market's unpredictable. You build a business for one market opportunity, the market shifts under your feet as you're building it. And the most successful management teams are those who actually manage to adapt to the changes in the market and the market opportunity. They generally stay true to their mission, but they're able to pivot and transition their businesses to the market's needs. And I'm not just talking about, cutting their burn rate in a down market in the capital markets. I'm also talking about major shifts in the target industry, the customer base, and now we see it with the advent of AI impacting businesses across, say, the education space dramatically. And and successful management teams, successful founders are those who are able to make those shifts and those transitions to another act. And doing that in the public markets is incredibly hard. And so, I think that the businesses that become durable, long-term value creators and wealth creators for our investor clients are generally led by people with those traits.
Yeah, it makes me think that sometimes adapting is difficult and very painful. But yeah, I think about our previous business, Debt Maven, which was kind of like a platform for private equity firms to meet lenders. We had 500 plus lenders on the platform. We closed 3 deals for $140 million, and we charge a small fee. Like, I made every mistake in the world as a first time founder, didn't raise enough money, got product wrong, et cetera. But that failed business actually taught us how to do marketing, which led to this business, which we've now had for 6 years. We have 11 full time employees, but like learning how to adapt was so painful. And I'm curious, kind of in your career, what are some of these times when you had to adapt that might have not been so comfortable?
Yeah. Well, the consistent theme in my career is that I've always worked with high growth tech companies. I just think it's the most innovative, interesting, fascinating, and inspiring part of the market to work in over the last 30 years. And I still feel that way today. So that's been the consistent theme for me and what I've done and what motivates me to get up every morning and go to work. Um, the I've worn many hats along that 30-year journey. I've been an analyst, an associate, a vice president. I've worked in M&A product groups. I've worked as an industry banker. When I started out, Silicon Valley was primarily semiconductor companies, and they had fabs actually located in Silicon Valley. Those fabs all got outsourced to Asia, and Silicon Valley became an innovation hub. And the advent of, say, the fabless semiconductor company came about. And as Silicon Valley has kind of broadened and fragmented, and we've had they build out of the communications infrastructure to support the distribution capabilities of the internet era, and then we've morphed into software, cloud computing, and all the other parts that now make up what is a massive tech ecosystem. I've had to repot myself several times, and so I think if you're talking to a banker who's starting out in this career, and I talk to our juniors all the time, one of the key elements of success is your ability to kind of read the room and see where the market's going and think 3, 5, 7 years out, and then adapt to what where the puck is going, to use a hockey analogy, and repot yourself several times. If you want to stay in banking and you have a passion for investment banking, particularly with tech companies, you have to reinvent yourself every 3 to 5 years.
It's interesting though, because you had, although the function changed, the seniority changed, you still stayed in one industry. So you had the network effect of those relationships, knowing the
Yeah,
companies. Although your product might change, you navigated within an industry.
I would say fundamentally, I've always stayed at the point of intersection between truly spectacular high growth companies and great growth investors. And putting those two together has been the most rewarding element of my career. Um, but I would also say that, yeah, I think having to repot yourself, having to reinvent yourself is necessary over the course of that career period. And I totally lost track of where I was going with that. So you're gonna have to edit that out.
Well, I'm curious, like, what are, you look at the career, and a lot of times when you look at the website or LinkedIn, you see a lot of sunshine and rainbows, and you see a lot of deal tombstones that have millions and billions to it, but we don't see some of the bumps along the road that actually were quite formative. And so I'm kind of curious, like, what have been some of those bumps along the road?
Well, I think investment banking is a very dynamic industry. Um, it's we ride capital cycles of the one I just described, COVID era, post COVID era, and and finding a platform that is stable, an investment banking business, I should say, or investment banking platform that is stable, that's supportive, that can be effectively and properly managed through those cycles, is key to career development as well. I mean, if your platform isn't falling apart from underneath you, as many have over the last several years, as a banker, that makes it very challenging to stay focused on the needs of clients and building a career in your network. And so finding a stable platform to operate from is really key. And so that's why it's been such an incredible run for me here at Oppenheimer over the last 7 years. And I just hit my 7 year anniversary last week, something that I was celebrating with our president and co-owner last week at Surf Ranch, which was great. But that's really a key element to this, is finding a stable platform to work from so that you can just focus on the needs of clients and advancing your career.
So, when if you were to talk about or talk to maybe some mid-career bankers who have been through the grind of the first analyst associate years, but they're kind of at that juncture, like, what's next? Is this the true direction that I want to go down, and being an advisor versus an operator versus an investor versus a consultant, going a
Yeah.
completely different direction? You know, what advice would you have for them on why to stay in this particular job function as a doing what you do?
Well, I don't always advise that they do, and that may sound controversial, but not everybody's suited to this role. Now, there are various elements, but of investment banking as you transition from a mid-level banker or mid-career banker to a senior banker, and you put your finger on something really, really difficult, Jordan. It's difficult for people to do because you go from becoming a number two or a number three on a deal team with some client exposure to being the guy who's out front doing business development, understanding, talking to, and has to establish trust with clients and investors at the very highest levels, C-suite, and venture capitalists, and boardroom members, and that's a big job, a big jump. It takes a lot of mentorship from the people above you to make that transition. So first of all, look for a strong mentorship. Secondly, I think you have to have an honest conversation in the mirror about who you are and who you aren't. A lot of people are very, very good at the technical aspects of investment banking, the financial aspects. They don't necessarily have the personality, the extroversion, and the drive innately to be out there building client relationships and developing client relationships and leading that part of the equation. And that's totally fine. It's just a different function. So, two ways to be really successful in this industry: become a technical product expert and become an industry banker who's passionate about a sector and who wants to eat, live, breathe, and sleep it. And those two paths are available to a mid-level banker at a certain point in their career. And they should pick something honestly based on how well they know themselves. So a high degree of self-awareness is really important. And then the right mentorship is really important. We try to put those two together here at Oppenheimer for our mid-level bankers and guide them the right way.
Um, Stay on this idea of founders, and thinking about processes that they go through. What do you think are some of the top mistakes that founders make when selling their company? And if you're just focused on selling, not all the other types of scenarios.
Yeah, well, the first mistake is just focusing on selling. Um, Companies going public as well. I see, most successful founders, CEOs in particular, in some cases even other executives in the management team who've been in the company for a long time. They're so razor focused on the mission that they forget to put in place the building blocks to manage their own personal wealth. And we're in the business of creating a lot of personal wealth for people in a very short space of time. And I'm fortunate to work at Oppenheimer, where we have a massive wealth management business, and we have people in that wealth management business who understand how to work with founders and executives to prepare for these liquidity events, whether it's the sale of the company or whether it's going into the public markets. And so I'd say being too focused on just that event for your company is one mistake they make. They don't spend the time to put in place the estate and trust planning and the tax preparation and planning that they need to actually optimize for themselves and their families what the financial impact is going to be. And that's really important. So one of the things we try to do early is introduce our wealth management team to founder CEOs. We've got a playbook there that's well practiced, and we help them get prepared for these events well ahead. So a year, 2 years ahead of a liquidity event. That's so be prepared is kind of issue number one. Um, Secondarily, obviously work with a great banker. Take the time to meet a lot of bankers. I think one of the things that I've seen rather distressingly over the last 30 years is that our business has become increasingly transactional. And I think any founder, CEO, or management team that chooses their advisors based on purely transaction creds and gets introduced to that team last minute to bring them in for a specific transaction misses the real opportunity, which is to have an advisor with you along for the journey. And it's very important to get to know your bankers at a professional and a personal level as early as you can. So you build a level of trust and you know who that person is, even at their core sort of personal level before you actually undertake such an incredibly important transaction as a sale of the company or an IPO.
Back on that first point, what is the difference ballpark financially for someone who does and does not do proper estate planning?
I would definitely refer you to one of our financial advisors.
But I mean,
Um,
it could be tens of millions of dollars.
Easily tens of millions of dollars. I hear horror stories all the time. There are absolute horror stories out there. People are suddenly saddled with 10, 20, $30 million tax bills. And that could have been avoided if they had taken certain steps early enough to, to manage their options and pay their taxes in a different way, and, you know, establish trusts and estates. And
Yep.
it's not my area of expertise. We have, financial advisors who are specialists at this for a reason. And
Yeah.
I would just say, make sure you talk to one.
So speaking of knowing the banker at a personal level, switching gears a little bit, you rode for Harry. I don't know who Harry is. I saw it on
Too many,
LinkedIn profile.
people do. So Harry Parker was our varsity coach at Harvard. He's probably one of the, if not the most legendary rowing coach of all time. He was an Olympian himself. And he had probably the most successful college coach career of any coach in any sport in America for a long period of time. Sadly, passed away, I think 5 or 6 years ago. But I was fortunate enough to row under him for several years at Harvard, and he was an absolute legend. I learned a lot from him.
What is a typical rowing practice like? What is it structured like? I know nothing about rowing. I do
Well,
completely different sports.
it's a great
But
training ground for Wall Street because you basically just have to be a complete masochist and be able to work yourself to death. So it's a great training show. We love student athletes. I love hiring student athletes.
yeah,
But rowers have a special place in my heart because I know just how thankless it is. I mean, you basically train year round for, probably a collective 12 to 15 minutes worth of racing in the racing season. And you train twice a day, most of the season, except for the racing season. And, it's just, it's a labor of love. So people really have to love the sport and be self-motivated and driven. And one of the things I learned from rowing for Harry was, if you aren't intrinsically motivated on your own, you're never going to be successful at something that's truly hard. And rowing is truly hard. And it's the same as investment banking. It's truly difficult. It's hard work, and it involves discipline and persistence. And so, if you don't have those attributes, you won't be successful. I actually gave the speech to my junior team back in February at our team offsite because a lot of them come from other backgrounds and are not um, familiar with Wall Street and what it takes to be successful here. And I used my experience with Harry and the rowing team to kind of give them a sense for what it takes to be successful. So it was a great experience for me, and it really teed me up for this career and this job. And a lot of other people who've been very successful in financial services industry also come from a rowing background.
and I think another interesting dynamic there, which is a parallel to a career, is that you're saying that you train a whole season for, call it 10 to 15 minutes of collective rowing time. And it makes me think that, when I did banking for 6 years, you get to a closed deal and you thought it would feel better for longer than it does. And then you realize, like, no, the actual thing that is good is the process of going through that and
Yeah,
enjoying the ups and the downs, of the lefts and the rights of the training and the team and the people you're working with. It's not the transaction. It's not the bonus, because it doesn't last that long.
right. No, it's right. I mean, you have to have the right psychological framework for this work. It's about getting people together, about helping them get along. It's about constant problem solving. To your point earlier around selling companies, every deal, if you're trying to sell a business to a buyer, dies three times on the way to getting done, and you have to kind of manage some pretty high emotions through those three deaths on the way to a successful deal. And so it's a taxing job emotionally. It's stressful, but it's very rewarding, extremely rewarding when you get to the finish line. And it's even more rewarding when you work with companies that go into the public markets and go on to become 30, 40, $50 billion market leaders. And you've known that company since they were 20 or 30 million in revenue. It's incredibly rewarding. We just hope to bring our investor clients along for the ride and hope that they create a lot of wealth along the way.
Well, how do you think about fulfillment? Yeah, how do you think about fulfillment in your career, and how has that kind of evolved? Because, and for maybe some context, when we first started 51 Labs, I'm like, am I just making videos and LinkedIn posts and websites for people who are trying to go from 1 billion to 2 billion? Like, is this what I really want to do with my life? And then I realized, like, no, wait a second. Like, it evolved after year 3, 4, and 5 that like we get to know people along this journey and be a part of their life. And it just so happens to be in this industry in this particular function. But I'm
Yeah.
curious how you think about fulfillment.
Um, well, I think I've thought about it very differently through different stages of the last 30 years, and it's ever evolving. So, like any career, there's an arc to investment banking. The first part of it is just figuring out how to do the job, the basic analysis, the grunt work that needs to get done as a junior banker. Then you get that to that middle level where you're straddling execution and getting deals done and doing what you're asked, but also taking a lot of initiative and being mentored into a senior banker role. As you transition to a senior banker role, it's about developing your network. It's about figuring out which clients need help, how to help them, how to bring the resources of your firm to helping them through important transactions, and doing that repeatedly and repotting yourself against the market opportunity as the market around you is evolving. And then you get into the sort of phase I'm in right now. And I just read this incredible book by Richard Rohr, who's I think it's either a Jesuit or a Catholic priest. He wrote a book called Falling Upward that was recommended to me by a private equity friend of mine and a lifelong friend of mine. And I found it incredible. I've listened to not only the audio book, but I actually sat and annotated with my yellow marker the entire book over the last couple of weeks. And he talks about life in stages: first stage, second stage. And as you get to a certain place in your career, your work shifts from that kind of how I define myself, how I've built my identity, in this case as an investment banker, to how do I give back, how do I mentor, how do I change from that sort of ego identity centric work to more soul driven work. And that's sort of the point you get to when you're running a team like I am. And you start to spend more time mentoring and growing and building your team and guiding management teams through important transactions and building the business in the investment bank as opposed to just working with clients. And it's been really challenging and really fun to make all these transitions over the last 30 years, but I couldn't be more excited about the next 10 to 15.
Yeah, there's a phrase somebody told me on the different stages of a career, and it's like learn, earn, return. Generally follows that framework.
It's
And
missing give back.
or return, like give back in time. And it, but it kind of made me think about this journey that we've been on really since 2016 when we went along the entrepreneurial journey, left banking February 8th, 2016. And in the beginning, when you're trying to start a business, you don't really know what you're doing. You think you have an idea. You think you know what the market wants. And then you start to just put in years and years and years, multiple businesses. And you're like, I'm tired of learning. I want to earn and I'm tired. Like it is painful. But one of the things I've learned along this startup journey is also that returning and giving back should be done in parallel, not after there. enough zeros in the bank account, and then you just donate to all these nonprofits. But there's a different way to return, and that's with time, that's with network, that's with expertise. And it was so painful in December 2018 when my wife, who's my co-founder, co-CEO, she's a former lawyer, she's like, you care more about vets than you do about the family. And I spent so much time building up the first nonprofit that I was getting the business out of whack. I was getting the family out of whack. But I
Hmm.
realized also, especially then going into COVID, like so much the fulfillment and what kind of kept me relatively even keel with the business ups and downs was giving and finding a way to do it on a sustainable basis, as opposed to just do the hours that I did in banking, et cetera, and then just do that with startup world and don't care about anything else. It took 5 or 6 years to then realize that actually you have such a more sustainable and happy life when giving is truly integrated in your early 30s, mid, late 30s, not just after I'm 60 and I have a couple more zeros in the bank account.
Right. Yeah, that's actually an interesting theme in this book I just read, Falling Upward, which is most people arrive at a point of real success having closed the first chapter of life or the first part of life very successfully, and then they say, well, what now?" And a lot of them only get to that giving back when they get into the second stage of life, if they've done the first half successfully. And he talks a lot in the book about how to do that. That's a fairly normal trajectory for people, particularly people who are successful in the first half of life. And he explains that in great detail. I think what you've done with 51 Vets is really beautiful, and I've been excited to be part of some of the offsites you've done with veterans to educate them on the investment banking industry, the financial service industry, the venture industry. It's great that you've been able to design that into your life and a way, for you guys to give back to a community that's in need in a meaningful way like that. So,
Well, and
um,
now it's finally integrated.
I wish I had been able to do that. I've had to find that outlet with my clients, but I've never actually been able to carve out the time in this industry to do that in the same parallel way that you have. So,
Well,
congratulations to you.
ha- it took, and it's been mistaken of just like when we started working with vets in 2017, it was interesting. But now in like one of our clients, Allied Industrial Partners, they've hired 4 veterans at their portcos,
Amazing.
and Alpine Investors has hired 10 of our members at their portcos. So like,
Yeah.
as you know, like on our calls, like I'm going to bring it up in some time, but after that times 81 projects over 6 years, it just finally is integrated. And then the dots only started to connect 6 years later.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's
how do you, well, how do you think about like, what are the causes or just things that you care about outside of, um, your work and your function? How do you think about, this chapter of your life for giving, whether it's time, talent, and treasure? Like, what are the things that you're exploring?
well. First of all, I, as we sort of talked about, I give a lot back to mentoring my team and working with junior bankers who are trying to sort of feel their way through the fog and figure out, is this career for me? If so, what does it look like? How do I mold myself into a successful banker? And I try to help guide them. So that my first work is internal with our team. The other part of my work is obviously working with founders, CEOs, and CFOs on their processes and how they feel their way through, particularly with younger founder CEOs who are doing it for the first time and management teams who haven't been through these processes before. So that's an exciting and rewarding way to give back. Outside of work, there are a few things that are really important to me. One of them, particularly, is the ocean. I spend most of my life as a surfer in my spare time, and on and in the ocean as a swimmer or a kayak racer. And so I recognize the issues that we have with ocean pollution and with decarbonization of the atmosphere, the ocean and part of the ocean fauna being a big opportunity for carbon dioxide recapture. And so, I'm an advisor to seatrees.org. I don't spend as much time with them as I would like, but it's certainly exciting to be part of the groundbreaking work that they're doing in planting mangrove forests and reforesting coral reefs. And so, I've had them to our Oppenheimer events actually to talk about the great work that they're doing. and to raise capital from some of the high net worth individuals in our ecosystem who also have a passion for ocean preservation. So that's one other way I find to give back. But much of my time is spent internally with
Well,
our team.
it's so interesting when you talk about it internally because there are so many different ways to give back. And I think it has this generalized context of a nonprofit type of outlet or output. And then
Yeah,
your comment reminds me of an episode I did with Jay Jester, formerly at Audax and been at Plexus Capital for a couple of years. And he's like, Jordan, I invest in small businesses. Think about if I spend more and more time with small businesses to become bigger businesses, like this is not just like, 25 million of EBITDA, stage. He's like, truly small businesses, like this is my passion, helping these smaller family run businesses. He's like, I'm helping out Main Street America. And like that,
yeah,
but it just hearing his definition of it. Now he has other causes he works on aside, but it was interesting to hear that. And then to your point about the team, we're now just, it was literally the past 60 days when we went from 8 people to 11 people that Jing and I realized how much we needed to shift our time to training, development, and,
yeah,
and, and as opposed to as much of the execution. And then just
yeah,
the passion of seeing, we went to a conference last week in McGuire Woods Emerging Manager Conference in Dallas with 1,000 people, had 500 LPs. And just to see our colleague, like the level of prep that she did, and it was her first conference, first video shoot. And you see like, to see her being thrown right into the deep end and swimming, I was like, this is now a part of how I've learned what fulfillment means. Like seeing
yeah.
that individual go from nothing brand new in the company for, I mean, less than 6 months to
Yeah.
being able to flourish and be able to hold their own. I was like, this is how I need to expand my definition of giving and fulfillment.
Well, that's incredible. I mean, I think we all need to find ways to give back. And, I think one of the things, um, it's very difficult in investment banking to carve out time for that sort of thing, but there are ways to do it. I would say that one of the most rewarding things about being in investment banking, particularly in tech, is that you get to be such an important part of raising capital and advising companies that are, in turn doing great things. So let's take your example, small to medium sized businesses, which make up the vast majority of business activity in the economy, no matter which way you slice it. So whether it's taking Wix public and raising capital for them, whether it's a freelance marketplace like Fiverr, who we took public recently, whether it's Shopify or um, Angie's List, working with SMBs in the services business. All of these businesses that we're working with to raise capital take that capital and use it to make the lives and the efficiency of small business owners far greater at scale. And so the small role that we play in raising capital has a huge ripple effect on these ecosystems of just in this case SMBs. And that's incredibly rewarding to see. And now it's these are businesses that are conceived by truly visionary founder CEOs and they're built. But the role that we play in helping fund those visions and helping and watching the impact that they have is truly rewarding. So I get a lot of my outlet through that. And I think anybody who's been in the investment banking industry for any long period of time has had similar experience.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of our clients. They have 5 communities that are like RV and manufactured home communities, but they call it attainable housing. And now they're raising a fund to go off and do this nationwide, not just 5 communities, 2,000 residents, but nationwide. And we went around one of their communities. I was like, it's so far removed from our typical work. Like we had a gene editing business we shot a video with, and then another one was like like there's a business called Stretch Zone, but this is completely different. It was so cool to see like, oh, our marketing work helps that person raise a fund, which allows them to build attainable housing nationwide and to start to connect the dots. And also
Yeah.
the philanthropic efforts that they have is like, okay, this is part of what we do in the bigger picture and a mission. Um, Maybe kind of shifting to a couple more questions. One is around work from home and kind of how you guys have kind of what your new schedule is what it is and what it isn't, how it's evolved, and then two more questions to wrap up. But we do Mondays in the office, and it's felt like it's uh, a good frequency to still maintain culture, and then Tuesday through Friday, because most of our team lives more than 30 minutes away. But how do you guys think about it? How has it evolved? Is it all back in office now? What's been kind of the evolution for y'all?
So the evolution was obviously complete work from home, which was necessitated by the lockdowns, to coming back to 3 days a week as soon
Yeah.
as it was safe to do so. We ran that play for a while, but ultimately, as I said earlier, this is a mentorship business, and the best way to learn is in person and as a team. You're also talking to a rower who believes in putting eight large men in a small
In the
boat.
same boat.
So that's how the work gets done. So that's just my DNA, my learning, my coaching. I mean, I've had to adapt as well. I think we've all proven coming out of COVID that work can be done effectively from home. I don't think that anyone who works from home full time, unless you're in a truly specialized field, um, is setting themselves up for success. I think we're human beings. We thrive on interaction. We learn from each other, whether it's the most innocuous coffee or
Yeah.
water cooler conversation to sitting alongside each other in cubicles and working in a collaborative team. So we've been back for a year and a half now, 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Which is kind of work from home for investment bankers because typically investment bankers are in the office 7 days a week.
It also helps to reinforce these boundaries, because when you are at home, there's no commute to have that forced break, as
Right.
opposed to we're home. Like, yeah, I could check my email. I could check my computer. My commute is 10 seconds.
COVID accelerated all of that. It allowed us to work far more seamlessly wherever we are. Um, for most people in our industry, that means you're working full time all around the clock and you're always
Yeah.
reachable, always in communication. And that's, good and bad. So, then it brought into our equation, well, how do we help particularly our junior bankers manage the stress and the work life balance necessary so they don't have developmental health problems and that they actually have the resiliency to stay in this career and progress to more senior levels. And so we did a lot of work with various organizations around that with our junior team, during and coming out of COVID. And I think we're settling in on something that works. I think 5 days a week, 9 to 5 in the office. The rest of the time, you can take your work home. But I do still encourage, our mid-level and junior bankers to stay in the office and work together as a team until the project's finished. It's far more efficient with everyone's time. It fosters collaboration and communication, and it develops that great sort of euphoria and excitement that comes from getting a project to the finish line as a team, which is fundamentally different than finishing your work on your own.
Yeah.
So
It,
we are,
it's, it's hard for us to wrestle with also, because I like being around our team. I like getting off a
yeah,
call with a new project. All right, next week you're going to Texas, you're going to Florida, and then the
yeah,
following week we're going to Alabama, and we're shooting 3 videos in 2 weeks. Who wants in? Let's think. And it's different than, okay, let's schedule a Zoom call, let's all get on. It's a different vibe, and also just it is a different training environment, and the speed and quality of that training.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I'll tell you, I had an incredibly rewarding experience a couple of weeks ago. I was in our San Francisco office, and we built our San Francisco office with a lot of extra space. We have a lot of empty cubicles as we're starting to hire people and build up the team again. And I walked in, and there's 7 or 8 of our junior team in the office. They've all clustered together, facing each other in one corner of this cubicle farm. And I walk in, and there's 2 directors standing, looking over the shoulder of our junior bankers, and the rest are all paying attention. They're talking as a group. They're collaborating as a group. Maybe it made me so happy I took a photograph. It was great.
and
So
that's
that's the kind of we're looking for.
and I think that speaks to what we all yearn for, which is to do hard work with people that you care about, and do it, um and just strive for this kind of this framework of like, um just mastery. And we all just don't know how to get there, but if we can do it together, as opposed to like, I don't see the purpose of what we were doing, the intention, the long-term view of it. um
Everybody has something to learn from someone else, and the more they put themselves in that kind of environment, the more they learn, and the faster they learn. So yeah, we definitely try to foster that. I agree with you. Everyone wants to be part of something meaningful and part of something greater than themselves. And
Well,
yeah.
that's when in our November of 2023, we had our fundraising event for 51 vets. We had 100 people in the room. And I was, before I got up and kind of gave a little chat, I was just like, why are we all here? And I think fundamentally, we all want our lives to mean something.
Mhm.
Sorry, let me pause this. Um, we all want our lives to mean something. And I think that's why those people were there in that room. And that there's this yearning for a deeper human connection. And maybe along that topic, it makes me think to a question I asked your colleague Mark Cabrera, who's on the healthcare side.
Uh-oh.
Here it comes. Um, but like, it's kind of a crazy question, but I think it cuts to the heart of a lot of truths of like someday in the distant future, um, what do you want your funeral day to be like?
Oh, I I prefer to think of it as a celebration of life. So I'd hope people in my life come together and celebrate what I achieved and what I accomplished and how I touched each of them.
What are some of these stories that you hope that they would tell?
Oh gosh, now you're really cutting to it. I haven't given that a lot of thought yet. Hopefully, this point in my life is a lot further out and
Oh,
close to
I said
home
distant future.
and distant. Um, I don't know. I think some of the themes we touched on today would be great to hear. I mean, he gave back. He was thoughtful. He was kind. He cared about people. He took the time to mentor and coach and pass on what he learned. And overall, was a contributor to society and in our community in many varied ways.
What do you hope that they don't say?
That he was a self-centered son of a bitch. Um, I don't know. Um, I don't know. I guess I'd be more focused on what they positive things they had to say, and I hope they lie about it.
I was chatting about this with Mark. I'm like, man, I want people to show up at 7 a.m. in their running clothes, see the casting. All right, good dude. Let's go for a marathon. Let's raise $51,000. But like through that, I hope that they would use that 4 to 6 hours of 50 to 100 plus people of doing something really tough together and realizing that, like, hey, see that dude in that casket? Like, we're not in there. So let's get after it and
Yeah,
let's raise some money while we do it.
that sounds great.
Maybe
I'll have to think about that.
3 people are going to show up for my funeral.
Your wife and kids are going to run the marathon.
There's an obligation. I'll put it in the will. Like, in order to get these assets, you must complete 26.2 miles on the day of the funeral. Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. This has been fun.
That was great and a tough question at the end. I'm going to have to give up on some thought and maybe have a better answer next time.
We can do a part 2, and then maybe we should do it with like you and Mark, and we'll just loop in somebody else from the team, and we'll get it going.
Good one.
Thanks so much.
Really enjoyed this, Jordan. Thank you.